very delighted to present my paper on documentary heritage of the Silk Road. And I am very pleased to attend this webinar organized by International Center for Documentary Heritage under the auspices of UNESCO. My name is Alisher Ikramov. I am a Director for Development of International Cooperation of the International Institute for Central Asian Studies. The institute, being created in 1995 in Samarkand, Republic of Uzbekistan, as outcome of UNESCO Decade Program on Integral Studies of the Silk Road of Dialogue. Since its beginning, our institution is carrying out multidisciplinary research on tangible, intangible, and documentary cultural heritage of the Silk Road. The Silk Roads were the interconnected hub and routes linking the ancient societies of the East, South, Central, Western Asia, and Mediterranean. It contributed to the development of many of the world's great civilizations and enabled the exchange of technologies and ideas that reshape the known world. This combination of routes represents one of the world's preeminent long-distance communication networks. And of course, these interconnections made an impact to the countries located along the Silk Roads. First of all, the development of cities along these routes, which gained power and wealth from the trade, providing the infrastructure of production and redistribution, and policing its routes. Many became major cultural and artistic centers where peoples of different ethnic and cultural backgrounds intermingled. The development of religious centers, which benefited from the patronage of political systems and wealthy individuals. Another impact was related with the movement of technologies, artistic styles, languages, social practices, and religious beliefs transmitted by people moving along the Silk Roads. The term Silk Roads was first coined by the 19th century German geographer Ferdinand von Richthofen in his lecture in 1877. However, he also recognized that there was a wide phenomenon of trans-Eurasian exchanges, which are now encompassed by the shorthand but we know as the Silk Road. What types of misconceptions been related with the Silk Roads? The first one, with the name Silk Roads, embodies that the silk was a primary commodity or driver of the exchange systems. In reality, there were a great number of goods being moved over both short and long distances and through a variety of different mechanisms. Many had a far greater impact than silk, reflecting the spread of technologies such as gunpowder, paper, or cotton, or were moved in far greater volumes. For example, salt, tea, copper, or iron. Elements of this interconnected system have sometimes been labeled with other single commodity terms, such as salt route, or the tea horse road, or split by topographic terms, such as oasis route, or desert route, steppe route, maritime route. Nevertheless, these terms, perhaps especially the Silk Road, have passed into common parlance. They have become evocative labels. What is of interest in the complexity of the interactions and their impact upon the development of past and present societies. So the term Silk Roads here is used to encompass this broad network and encompasses routes that many might be familiar with other names, such as tea horse route. Another misconception is related with the fact that the principal impact of the Silk Roads was on an economic trading network. There is no doubt that the movement of goods and the volume of exchange and the taxation systems that extracted wealth from this process had a massive impact on many of the societies along the Silk Roads. It shaped the ability to construct the cities, religious monuments, and elite structures for which the Silk Roads are famous. But the most significant outcome of these complex networks of interactions was the movement of people and ideas, the spread of religions, social customs, languages, political ideas, agricultural practices, scientific knowledge, and technological innovations. Another further misconceptions is that the Silk Roads are primarily about the exchange of material between East and West, and typified by silk, initially produced in China and transported as far west as Europe. But the movements are much more complex. Goods and people did not simply flow from east to west and vice versa. Many of the materials traded emanated in Central and or South Asia, and many of the ideas that moved along the Silk Road started neither in the east or west, for example, Buddhism. As a result, the patterns of routes from north to south are also vital elements of the complex systems that is being explored. There is no doubt that understanding the routes across the Central and South Asia is essential to understanding the Silk Roads. The Silk Roads have been often defined by the impact upon the end, China and Europe, but this significantly underplays the complexity of their overall impacts, almost making them seem more relevant to the ends and the rest of the regions through which they passed. The reality is that the Silk Roads were essential in shaping the societies along their whole lengths. Goods and ideas moved north-south as well as east-west. Crucial exchanges took place across the Tibetan plateau and through the high mountain passes of the Karakoram mountain range via Gujarat Pass, linking Xinjiang with modern-day Nepal, Bhutan, Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. The complex links between Central Asia and South Asia through Afghanistan and Pakistan was also a vital aspect of the cultural exchange. The much commented upon routes traveled by Buddhist monks, so vital in the movement of ideas from South to East Asia, who all used south-north paths that connected South and Central Asia. There were crucial aspects of the Silk Roads, and it's vital that the complexity of movements does not become oversimplified into the East-West dialogue. There are also misconceptions regarding the number of routes and their variability in space and time. There was no single road winding from Asia to Europe. Rather, there was a diversity of paths, tracks, and roads, changing not only over time, but also fluctuating seasonal, as river crossings and mountain passes became impassable, and shifting as travelers passed across wide valleys and steppes, choosing different routes across the landscape. Regional conflicts, changing markets, and shifting political power meant that the Silk Roads were never static. The importance of the specific sections of the route changed over time in response to a variety of socio-political factors. It is these spatial and temporal changes in exchange and trade and the scale of movement of people and ideas which articulate the significance of the Silk Roads. As a result, this report always uses the plural Silk Roads rather than singular. Another issue to note is that the Silk Roads were never a systematically planned network of routes or infrastructure over its entire length in certain regions and at specific times. It was very well planned and supported, for example, the system of Seljuk caravanserais or Han Dynasty forts, but it was often very local responses to specific geopolitical circumstances. The exchange of goods and with them ideas and knowledge played a major role in the cultural, religious, and artistic exchanges that took place between Europe and Asia during antiquity. The long-distance movement of material and goods involved trade, exchange, gift-giving, and the payment of tribute. The latter consideration may have sometimes overshadowed material motifs in exchange of goods, but the Silk Road undoubtedly facilitated the transfer of large quantities of raw materials, foodstuffs, and luxury goods. Silk was among several high-value, relatively low-weight goods that moved along the Silk Road. Rhubarb, spice, musk, and tea. At various times, all these commodities have been used to describe part of the routes, reflecting their importance. Their high-value goods certainly moved over considerable distance, exchanged from one merchant to the next. The variety of high and medium-value goods that moved through the Silk Road network was truly remarkable. Some of this relied on the manufacturing skills to create value, as with the Song dynasty ceramics, while many other commodities would have been shipped as raw materials rather than finished goods. For example, the famous Damas steel produced in Central Asia was probably moved as ingots before being worked by craftsmen in Damascus. Many have argued, particularly in the classical world, that overland trade was too expensive for low-value communities. While it is certainly likely that cities did not rely on long-distance trade to feed themselves, a more complex pattern of ancient economic activity is becoming apparent, including responses to risk and the movement of agricultural supplies. It is likely that not all the goods being moved were destined to the transported vast distances. Much of the materials, perhaps the bulk of caravans, was probably shorter distance goods, bulkier, low-value goods moving to regional markets. It is probable that large parts of these were driven through the mechanisms of government and or military supply, but there are also a greater understanding of carrying capacities and costs. The scale of this movement of domestic consumption rather than elite exchange and the scale of social impact that this suggests is currently becoming clear from the archaeological evidence. More work of this movement of materials such as ceramics, glass, or metalwork will help to build a more complex picture of this interaction and its scale. The existence of dedicated merchants and purpose-built market centers, bazaars, testify to the scale of activity along the Silk Road. It is perhaps hard to see this is solely explained through the small quantity high-value goods. Some have argued that without the high-value and portable commodities such as silk, there would have been insufficient profits to be made from other goods for long-distance land routes to Central Asia and beyond to be sustainable. But trade in silk did not happen in isolation, but was built on a foundation of the trade in other commodities. Not all of it long distance and much of it already well established. It would be misleading also to assume that the silk from China was for Roman market. Indeed, the demand for ordinary goods provides an explanation for the development, success, and long-term viability of regional trade networks. These ordinary goods, household furnishing, containers, and utensils, are valued for their social as well as for their functional content, where social content is expressed through decoration, form, and choice of material type. The use of goods in social interactions provide a way for individuals to proclaim their group identity. This identity is a key factor in creating and maintaining social bonds within a group. The scale of these interactions also impact upon the nature of the networks and polities that were created. Nevertheless, it may be that trade in high-value commodities is the best explanation for the creation of sufficient wealth to find some of the major outcomes of the Silk Road, such as impressive sacred sites. webinar, allow me now to share with you on one very important and unique documentary heritage related with the Silk Road, the Sogdian language in its scripts. It has been a little over 100 years since the discovery of the first major Sogdian text by the Turfan expedition of the early 90s. Since then, further Sogdian texts have been discovered at more or less regular intervals, and since excavation and are ongoing in parts of the former Sogdiana and neighboring regions, it is likely that the new texts will continue to turn up. Sogdian is a language belonging to the Iranian branch of the Indo-European language family. It was originally spoken in an area centered on Samarkand in present-day Uzbekistan and extending from Bukhara in the west of Tashkent and Shian-Chach in the northwest. Sogdian merchants set up trading posts along the Silk Roads, terrestrial routes deep into China and even Mongolia. As a result, Sogdian came to be spoken and written over a very wide area, both as a native language and as a lingua franca, used by people who were native speakers of other languages. In fact, the great majority of Sogdian materials known today were not found in Sogdiana, but in the Turfan Oasis and in Dunhuan in the western China. In the 6th to 4th centuries BC, Sogdiana formed part of the Achaemenid Empire of the Darius I and his successors. The language most widely used for long-distance communication throughout this huge area was Aramaic, which could be conventionally written in ink on portable materials such as papyrus or parchment. In Sogdiana, as in most other parts of the empire, after its breakup, when the local languages began to be written, it was naturally the Aramaic script that people employed for the purpose. In each region, the Aramaic script developed different local characteristics, eventually giving rise to the distinct scripts known as Parthian, Khwarezmian, Sogdian, and so on. This retained many features of the underlying Aramaic script, including the direction of writing from right to left, and a standard alphabet of 22 letters, all of which basically represent consonants, the vowels being indicated only approximately, if at all. The earliest Sogdian texts of any significant length are a group of inscriptions on clay plaques found at Koltebe in southern Kazakhstan, to the north of Tashkent, which may date as early as the 1st or 2nd century AD. The Koltebe inscriptions are a group of dedicatory inscriptions on the foundation stones of a fortress in Koltebe. They are now preserved in the Central State Museum of Kazakhstan. It would have been in the north of Sogdiana. The inscription seems to allude to military operations along the border of Sogdiana with more northern nomads. The inscriptions are understood as recording the colonization of the area by Sogdians from the cities of Samarkand, Kesh, its current-day Shahrisabz, Nakhshab, it is Karshi, and Bukhara, under the leadership of the generals from Chach, Tashkent, as well as division of the land between the Sogdians and the nomadic people of the region. The Koltebe inscriptions are written in the archaic form of the Sogdian script that is still close to its Aramaic prototype. The next important Sogdian texts are the ancient letters, so-called, written in the early 4th century. By this time, phonetic spellings are more common than logograms, and there is a tendency to join together the individual letters within the word. They are letters from Sogdian merchants away from the homeland to contact back home in Samarkand that were found still unopened and sealed in the postal bag. in a watchtower between Dunhuan and Lowlan on the route to Samarkand. They never reach their destinations, and thus that their recipients may never have been informed of the dramatic events described in the letters. The date of 312-313 AD is generally accepted for the composition of the letters. There are 5 well-preserved, nearly complete letters, a moderately preserved fragment of the 6th letter, and smaller fragments of perhaps 2 more letters. The letters are written in the Sogdian script, also in an archaic form that is less cursive than that used in the MOOC documents and represent a stage close to the Aramaic script. The ancient letters also make use of a number of heterograms not used in letter ratings in Sogdian scripts and contain a number of Indian words for commercial terms, indicating perhaps close relations between Sogdians and Indian merchants. Only the most common words are still written by means of logograms, and the script becomes more and more cursive, as evident in a fragment from the epic tale about the hero Rustam. A disadvantage of the cursive script is that many letters become difficult to distinguish from one another. This problem would be overcome by the development of more formal and calligraphic variety of Sogdian script, often referred to as sutra script, because it was mainly used for copying Buddhist texts such as the Santara Jataka. Buddhist texts in Sogdian come from both Turfan and Dunhuan, and were produced probably in the 7th, 8th centuries AD. These texts are typically written in the variety of the Sogdian script known as the formal script, sometimes called sutra script, but are also commonly found in other varieties of the Sogdian script. In nearly all cases have the text been identified and the translation from identifiable Chinese original, so it is sometimes the case that an exact parallel is no longer extant in Chinese. The Sogdian transcriptions of Sanskrit and Chinese names and words are extremely fruitful material for the study not only of Sogdian but also of the Sanskrit and Chinese pronunciation of that era. In the late of 6th century, the Uyghur Turks adopted the Sogdian cursive script and language for writing their earliest inscriptions. Subsequently, the same form of writing came to be used for the Turkish language itself, developing into a form known as Uyghur script. Later still, the same script was borrowed for writing Mongolian and Manchu. A characteristic feature of all these scripts derived from the Sogdian was that they were usually writing vertically rather than horizontally, a change of orientation that began among the Sogdians themselves as early as the 5th century. The Karabal Gasun inscription is a commemorative trilingual Sogdian Chinese Uyghur inscription on a large granite boulder in present-day Mongolia, commissioned by the 8th Hagan of the Uyghur Steppe Empire, of which the official religion was Manichaeism, from about 762-763 AD, until its collapse in about 840 AD. Much value lies in the fact that many historical events are only known from the inscription and that it describes the adoption of Manichaeism by the Uyghur Khagans. Ironically, it was actually the first original Sogdian text to become known, so it was mistakenly thought to be Uyghur from its discovery in the late 18th, before the discovery of the Turfan text, until 1909, when it was recognized as Sogdian. The Sogdian script in its various forms is sometimes referred to us as the Sogdian national script because it was available to all speakers of the language and used for writing text of all sorts, including religious texts, as well as inscriptions, letters, and legal documents. In addition, adherents of the Manichaean and Christian religions in the Turfan oasis also made use of their own scripts for writing Sogdian, as well as other languages. The Manichaean scripts is a cursive variety of alphabet used by people of Palmyra in Syria for writing the Palmyrian dialect of Aramaic. Because this was the script that Mani, the founder of Manichaean religion, had used, it had a special status among his followers, who employed it for many different languages. For some of these, including Sogdian, they added extra letters for consonants that the 22 letters of the basic Aramaic alphabet could not adequately represent. The Manichaean script, which also lacked the logograms of the Sogdian script, thus gives a clear representation of at least the consonant sounds of the Sogdian language. Mani was famous not only as a prophet of a new religion, but also as artist. This may in part account for the beautiful calligraphy and decoration that distinguishes the manuscripts in Manichaean scripts. Like the Manichaeans, the Christians also had a special attachment to the particular scripts, in their case, the Syriac script. This was yet another variant of Aramaic with the same basic 22 letters. For writing Sogdian, 3 and sometimes 4 extra letters were added. But more importantly, some scribes adopted the East Syrian system of inserting points above and below the letters to distinguish one vowel from another. Finally, a few late Sogdian manuscripts, mostly medical texts, are written in Central Asian variant of the Indian Brahmi script. In principle, this script indicates all vowels. Also, the value of these manuscripts as evidence for the pronunciation of Sogdian is limited by their poor state of preservation. The latest known Sogdian manuscripts of any kind probably dated from the 11th century. After that period, Sogdian was no longer used as a written language, having been superseded by Persian and Arabic in Sogdiana, and by Turkish and Chinese in the Turfan oasis, and farther east. Sogdian continued to be spoken after this time, and the fact of one Sogdian dialect has survived until the present day in the remote area of Tajikistan, where it is known as Yagnobi. Sogdian texts are held in a number of different collections around the world, each of which use their own numbering system and publishes their own catalogs. The major obstacles encountered, therefore, is due to the fact that different expeditions, especially to Turfan, from different countries often collected fragments belonging to a single manuscript. Those fragments were subsequently dispersed around the world, assigning fine signatures or self-numbers according to each collection's unique system, and cataloged independently of one another. This means that scholars often have been reconstruct texts by combining manuscript fragments held in disparate collections. The major collections of the Sogdian texts are in Berlin. The Turfanschung of the Berlin Brandenburg Academy of Science, whose online catalog, Digital Turfan Archives, contains digital images of pretty much every fragment in their possession. It is the largest collection of texts from the oasis of Turfan. In London, the Stein collection of the British Library holds texts from Dunhuan, as well as Turfan and some other Central Asian sites. There exists no catalog as such for Sogdian texts, but they are comparatively few in a number and have mostly all been published with good descriptions. In St. Petersburg, the Russian Academy of Science possesses two major collections of Sogdian texts: the MOOC documents from Tajikistan and fragments from Turfan. The collections have presumably been digitized, but are not yet available online. Mount Mung of Tajikistan is a site in the castle east of Panjikent, present-day Tajikistan, overlooking the Zarafshan and Kum rivers, which was a refuge of the last ruler of Panjikent fleeing the conquering Muslim armies in the early 8th century. In 1932 and 1933, some Sogdian documents were discovered there, which turned out to be part of the archives to Dovastich, one of the final Sogdian pre-Islamic rulers. The materials from Muk, including 74 Sogdian documents, an Arabic one, and a handful in Turkish and Chinese, are now in the Oriental Institute of St. Petersburg. Some collection of the Sogdian text preserved in Paris. The Piliot collection in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France holds about 30 Sogdian texts from Dunhuang, and a handful of Sogdian Uyghur texts also from Dunhuang. There are no separate catalog, but a description of all Sogdian fragments is provided. There are also a collection of Sogdian texts in Kyoto. The Otani collection houses a number of Sogdian fragments, most quite small, which were cataloged and edited in Japanese. Finally, there are some smaller holdings of Sogdian texts, none of which exceeded more than a few fragments each. This includes a Mannerheim collection in Finland. In the meantime, International Institute for Central Asian Studies carrying out inventory studies activities of new foundings of Sogdian texts in the territory of Central Asia and Mongolia. And recently, we organized online conference with librarians and archivists and specialists in the ancient scripts along the Silk Road countries with the purpose of joint studies, research activities for identification, inventory, categorizing, and digitizing of the documentary heritage related with the Sogdian text. Thank you very much for your attention.